Have you ever had this strange feeling that you experience the world a little differently than everyone else? Not in some dramatic superhero kind of way, but in small, quiet moments. Moments where you notice things other people seem to miss. You pick up on subtle shifts in someone's tone. You sense tension in a room before anyone says a word. You recognize patterns in behavior that repeat again and again. And sometimes, you find yourself asking questions that nobody else seems to be asking. Why did they say that? Why did their attitude suddenly change? Why do people follow certain social rules that don't actually make sense? Over time, these observations start to create a strange feeling, a quiet sense that you might not experience reality the same way most people do. And sometimes, that feeling can be isolating. You might sit in a conversation surrounded by people, yet still feel strangely alone, not because you dislike people, but because you're constantly observing what's happening beneath the surface. Psychology actually has a name for this experience. It's often associated with high self-awareness. And people with high levels of self-awareness often move through the world very differently from everyone else. Not necessarily better, not necessarily worse, just differently. To understand why this happens, we have to look at what self-awareness really means. Because most people misunderstand it. Self-awareness is not simply thinking about yourself. It's not overthinking. And it's not insecurity. Real self-awareness is something much deeper. It's the ability to observe your own thoughts as they happen. To notice your emotions while you're feeling them. To watch your own behavior almost as if you were an outside observer. In psychology, this is sometimes described as metacognition, thinking about thinking. And once this ability develops strongly, it changes the way you experience almost everything. Because instead of simply reacting to life, you're constantly aware of the processes happening inside your mind. This leads to the first major trait of highly self-aware people. They engage in constant self-observation. Many people move through life on autopilot. They react emotionally. They speak impulsively. They make decisions quickly, and rarely pause to analyze why they did what they did. But highly self-aware people tend to do the opposite. After a conversation, they might replay it in their mind, not to criticize themselves endlessly, but to understand what happened. Why did I react that way? What emotion was driving my response? Did I misunderstand something? Could I have communicated more clearly? This habit of reflection creates something powerful. It gradually builds psychological insight. Over time, self-aware people begin to recognize patterns in their own behavior. They see how certain environments affect their mood. They understand which situations trigger anxiety. They notice when they're acting from fear rather than logic. And because they see these patterns, they gain the ability to change them. But this same habit of observation doesn't stop with themselves. It naturally expands outward, which leads to the second trait of highly self-aware individuals. They become extremely good at pattern recognition. Human behavior follows patterns. People repeat emotional habits. They repeat communication styles. They repeat relationship dynamics. But most individuals are too busy participating in these patterns to notice them. Highly self-aware people often step back just enough to observe them. They start noticing contradictions in conversations. For example, someone might say they value honesty, but become uncomfortable when someone tells the truth. Someone might claim they dislike drama, yet consistently create conflict wherever they go. Over time, these contradictions become easier to see, and this awareness can feel both fascinating and exhausting. Because once you start recognizing patterns, it becomes difficult to ignore them. You might notice when someone is pretending to be confident. You might detect insecurity hidden behind humor. You might sense when someone's friendliness isn't genuine. And sometimes, you realize that entire social dynamics are built on unspoken emotional rules. This heightened awareness can make social environments feel almost transparent, like watching a play where you can see both the actors and the script, which leads to another important aspect of high self-awareness: emotional depth. When someone is deeply aware of their own internal world, they tend to experience emotions more intensely, not necessarily more dramatically, but more consciously. Instead of simply feeling anger, they recognize the layers beneath it. Maybe the anger came from disappointment. Maybe the disappointment came from unmet expectations. Maybe those expectations were shaped by past experiences. This kind of emotional analysis creates complexity. Highly self-aware people often spend more time processing their feelings. They reflect on experiences longer. They revisit memories. They examine emotional reactions carefully. And because of this, their emotional landscape becomes richer. But it also becomes heavier. Because awareness doesn't only reveal pleasant truths, it also exposes uncomfortable ones. You might realize when someone you trusted wasn't being genuine. You might recognize when a relationship is quietly fading. You might notice emotional manipulation that others overlook. This level of perception can create a strange internal tension. Part of you wants to see reality clearly, but another part of you realizes that clarity often removes comforting illusions. And this brings us to one of the most common experiences shared by highly self-aware people. Social friction. Most societies run on shared assumptions. Unspoken agreements about how people are supposed to behave. These norms create stability. They allow large groups of people to interact smoothly. But highly self-aware individuals often question these rules. Not out of rebellion, but out of curiosity. Why do we say things we don't mean just to appear polite? Why do people hide their true emotions behind socially acceptable responses? Why do certain traditions continue even when nobody remembers why they started? Asking these questions can sometimes make highly self-aware people feel like outsiders. Because while many individuals instinctively follow social expectations, self-aware individuals often analyze them. And analysis changes perception. When you understand the mechanics of a system, it's harder to fully participate in it without noticing the gears turning. This can lead to moments where you feel slightly disconnected from the crowd. Not completely separate, but aware of the difference. Like standing inside a conversation while simultaneously observing it from the outside. This sensation can sometimes be interpreted as loneliness. But it's not always loneliness in the traditional sense. It's more like a quiet awareness that your internal world operates differently from many people around you. However, there is an important truth that often gets overlooked. High self-awareness is not just a source of difficulty. It also carries extraordinary advantages. Because awareness creates choice. When you recognize your own emotional patterns, you gain the ability to change them. When you understand your motivation, you can align them with your values. When you see social dynamics clearly, you can navigate them more intelligently. In many ways, self-awareness acts like an internal compass. It helps people make decisions that are more intentional, more aligned with who they truly want to become. Research in psychology consistently links self-awareness with personal growth. People who regularly reflect on their behavior tend to learn faster from mistakes. They adjust their strategies. They refine their goals. They develop stronger emotional regulation. And over time, this creates something remarkable. Wisdom. Not the kind of wisdom that comes from age alone, but the kind that comes from deep reflection. The kind that emerges when someone repeatedly examines their experiences and extracts meaning from them. So if you've ever felt like you observe the world differently, if you often find yourself analyzing conversations, emotions, and patterns, if you sometimes feel slightly out of sync with the crowd, it may not mean there's something wrong. It may simply mean that your mind is operating at a higher level of awareness. And while that awareness can sometimes feel isolating, it also offers a rare opportunity. The opportunity to understand yourself more clearly than most people ever do. To recognize patterns that shape your life, and to consciously decide which ones you want to keep, and which ones you want to change. Because in the end, self-awareness isn't about being different. It's about being awake. And once someone truly wakes up to the patterns of their own mind, they rarely see the world the same way again.